I'm all over the world, but we're not involved in Russia.
I have nothing to do with Russia, folks, okay?
I have no dealings with Russia. I have no deals in Russia. I have no deals that could happen in Russia because we've stayed away. And I have no loans with Russia. I have nothing to do with Russia. I have no investments in Russia, none whatsoever. I don't have property in Russia.
I promise you I don't have any deals with Russia.
Tonight's news proves that Bob Mueller does not take those statements at face value, and he's using a subpoena for the first time to look at whether there were, yes, deals with Russia. I want to turn now to former federal prosecutor Seth Waxman, as well as journalist Natasha Bertrand, who covers the Russia probe for The Atlantic. We wanted both of you for both sides of this. One, why a subpoena? Two, the Russia story that you've been so closely monitoring. What would you be looking for? Why a subpoena? Do you view it as an aggressive move against the Trump organization?
Well, it could be indicative of one of two things. One, standard best practices may be to issue a subpoena to make sure everybody's on notice for all the reasons that you stated. On the other hand, it could also be because they have not been getting the cooperation that they want, that they're getting either half productions or productions that look like they're missing documents, or they want to put everybody on notice within the Trump organization if they destroy documents or do any kind of shenanigans that they could face their own criminal problems, and that would be another reason for issuing a subpoena.
And based on your knowledge of the kind of prosecution team that Bob Mueller's put together, what's your theory of why they're doing that?
Probably the latter, more than that. I mean, also an organization like the Trump organization has a regular document destruction policy. So, you know, whether it's 6 months or a year, the corporation will purge records as a normal course of business. You put a grand jury subpoena out there, that kind of trumps that rule and makes sure that they're, following the commandment of the subpoena. The last point I'd make is that this is a court enforceable document, the subpoena. So if there are any shenanigans now, it's not you didn't voluntarily cooperate with what I asked you. It's I might go over to district court, talk to a judge, and start thinking about contempt charges.
Well, and this is something that Congressman Schiff, the top Democrat on the Intel Committee, was speaking with me about last night, and that Rachel Maddow was also reporting on last night, which is that probe, which has now been, they say, Democrats say, kneecapped by the Republicans this week, was actually getting into areas of business and money laundering questions. Take a listen to how Schiff put it last night.
I'm particularly concerned about the issue of money laundering. Were the Russians laundering money through the Trump organization? Is this a lever they can hold over the President of the United States? It would be derelict in our responsibilities not to find out.
Last night, Adam Schiff says that today the subpoena hits that same organization, the Trump organization.
It's really interesting. And in my conversations with people on this committee, the Democrats were pretty much on the verge of really starting to delve into this question of whether or not money laundering occurred. And they were kind of cut short. They had tried to get a subpoena for Deutsche Bank, and they were kind of blocked by the Republicans, who, of course, wanted to subpoena Fusion GPS's bank instead. And, of course, we saw that in this kind of status report that the committee, that the Democrats on the committee issued the other day, we saw that they had evidence that the Trump organization was trying to build a Trump Tower in Moscow with the help of a sanctioned Russian bank. Now, we don't know which bank that was. It's still a matter of committee business, so they are not saying which bank it was. But all sources point to it being this huge sanctioned bank in Russia called Sberbank. And so if there is evidence that the Trump organization was pursuing this Trump Tower in Moscow with the help of a sanctioned Russian bank, which the committee kind of left the breadcrumbs out there for investigative journalists or even Mueller to look at, then it's really problematic for them. I mean, we also know
well,
that...
you know, the thing about breadcrumbs is they make you hungry for more.
And that's exactly why they did this.
So look at that in the context of, again, it's not that we're pulling together random threads. Schiff says that about money laundering. The Democrats, on your reporting as well, were getting close to something that puts so much heat on that the whole probe in the House gets wrapped up. And then I was just on the Hill today speaking with sources and speaking with some members of Congress. I talked to Congressman Quigley, who's on the Intelligence Committee. And to the point you're raising about what the Republicans were doing as these questions basically percolated, here's what he said.
Literally from day one, we had a committee on intelligence with Republican leadership working in lockstep to sandbag the investigation.
You think the way Republicans shut down this Russia probe this week is obstructive?
Well, absolutely. It's a pattern of behavior.
So Adam Schiff has actually come out and said that they have seen evidence of collusion and that the Republicans have seen it too, but they just chose to ignore it. Now, whether or not that's true, I'm sure that the Republicans would say that that is not true, that what the Democrats consider collusion or what they consider some kind of business ties between the Trump organization and Russia is just a matter of coincidence. But we do know that both Donald Trump Jr. and Eric Trump, Trump's sons, have said in the past that the Russians make up a disproportionate interest in the organization. And we saw Eric Trump as recently as 2014 telling someone, who then later told the press, that he said that they secured a $100 million loan from the Russians that very year to finance Trump's golf courses. So these are all just loose threads that are hanging out there that were really never completed by the committees, and hopefully it's something that Bob Mueller will be able to get to the bottom of.
So the Beat viewers are smart. They listen to Natasha Bertrand lay out that overwhelming evidence. And Seth, if this were a Perry Mason episode, it would be near the end of the episode. You're talking about the money. You're talking about the cover-up. You're talking about public statements about where the money's coming from. Now you got the subpoena hitting the Trump org. And then what I showed up there is, well, why is Donald Trump always denying this? You know, the comedian Billy Eichner came on the show, and he said, well, we know there's collusion because Trump said there was no collusion, and that's the first clue. And I don't mean to make light of a serious inquiry, but when Donald Trump makes that many statements about how there's no Russian deals, while his sons talk about the Russian deals and the money, and we have the written contemporaneous evidence of Michael Cohen, who's in the eye of the storm trying to make a Russia deal, what's left for Mueller as he goes through the Trump org documents?
Well, so first, as to it being close to wrapping up, I mean, that subpoena is going to require a lot of time to comply with.
No, I don't mean wrapping up. I just mean some of the clues are a little obvious at this point.
Well, they are. And so why does Donald Trump continue to do things that benefit the Russians? I mean, we saw today he imposed sanctions through one of his agencies, but those sanctions were against people who've already been sanctioned or have already been indicted. Where are the indictment or sanctions against the oligarchs, against the senior Russian officials who are close to Putin? You know, one of the answers might be is that you don't want to sanction people that you've been involved in a criminal conspiracy with because they may have the goods on you.
We'll put on the screen what you're talking about, which is there was the Russian sanctions that came out today, but when you look at this comparison, take the Internet Research Agency, that's in the Mueller indictment. Boom, it's in the Trump sanctions today. You look at all of these other figures, they're all rolled into the sanctions. On the one hand, Natasha, that's interesting because it shows the Trump administration, however much it was dragged to it, acknowledging facts in the Mueller indictment. On the other hand, it does raise the question of what would U.S. foreign policy be right now if Donald Trump didn't so brazenly, stupidly remove the FBI director, leading to the appointment of Mueller that led to the left hand of the screen I just showed?
Well, it's a really interesting question, and a number of experts that I spoke to today said that these sanctions are a good step in the right direction because they show that the Trump administration is in some way taking Russia's election interference seriously, but they also don't go nearly far enough because, like Seth said, they don't sanction the oligarchs. They don't really hit Putin where it hurts, which is in his pocket. And of course, the oligarchs are basically his agents of influence throughout the world. So this is something that experts look at and they say, okay, well, this is basically a carbon copy of what Mueller has already put out there. Let's see if they can go a little further, and let's see if the president himself can come out and actually condemn the Russians and actually issue a statement of support for these sanctions. We don't know whether or not the Treasury Department did leave open the possibility that there will be more sanctions on these Russian oligarchs. But as of right now, it's really just, you know, more of the same that we saw in the Mueller indictment.
So we started big. Seth, I want to end small. If you're a person working at the Trump organization in New York or at one of their satellite properties, and you're hearing about all this, and you get some pressure, hey, by the way, maybe forget about that. Or as Donald Trump allegedly told Director Comey, maybe leave Flynn alone. He's a good guy. What is your legal exposure for that? Could you go to jail for doing that?
Don't do it. Don't do it. Call a lawyer. Do what you're supposed to do under that subpoena, because whether it's the CEO, the COO, or some other official within the Trump organization that says, see these documents, let's just put them over here in this desk and forget about them, that could be a criminal act. And that's what this subpoena does. It criminalizes anyone who hides or tampers with or destroys evidence.
Well, you know, there's an old saying, you're no Maya Wiley, but that seems like good legal advice.
I'll take it.
It's not a real saying.
No one's Maya Wiley.
What is that?
No one's Maya Wiley.
Okay, I think that's
Go into that one.
Very much appreciate both the journalistic and legal context here on a big day in Washington. We have so much more. Thanks to Natasha and Seth. Stay with me. Coming up.